let's talk about labs.
Let's talk about labs. Let me, oh, I guess we are recording. So
I would say, well, let's start with a better intro.
So, here we are, episode 3, Gutsy Gals, talking labs, because again, there are different lenses in functional versus conventional interpretation and ordering and which ones we use and all kinds of stuff.
Why?
And I know it is very common to hear things like, well, my doctor says my labs are normal, so no, it's not that. Or, well, they checked my thyroid. Yeah, my TSH was fine. ... So I know one of the things we talked about Linky, was first getting into essentially how labs determine what their normal range is. And so I thought we could hit that, how labs determine that, and then what doctors look at, and kind of our current medical system does and how that's different.
All good topics. I'm excited.
I have learned about how labs come around, but I think you have learned some things too in your time. So why don't you start? When did you get into this topic?
Oh God. So when did I get into labs? Undergrad, I think, actually, is when I first started learning about labs. Loosely how the normal ranges were determined. And many of the, quote, normal range lab determinants were taken from military studies early in the 1900s and in the 1950s, and were largely white males of a young age in general. Not all labs, but the broad sweeping way in which most normal range values have been determined was, well, let's just look at a subset of, hey, we've got military recruits. Military recruits, by the way, sign up to do all kinds of things. One of which is we're going to just take blood samples and we're going to see what is normal within this group. And here we go. Here's how these normal ranges were determined. Well, that's great if you are a dude who's young and white.
Well, this is different than what I learned.
Okay.
But and I don't know, maybe that was the original, and
I would say, but it depends upon what types of labs we're looking at. Some labs were like, okay, well, we're just going to take this huge data set and then see what fits in the normal range. That's another way that a lot of labs work. Normal ranges were created. We're like, okay, let's just take this huge set and see what came out of it.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with that is, what set of patients were you picking from? Because that's the other thing. Depending upon what set of patients you're picking from. So, for example, if you're looking at kidney labs and you're looking at kidney patients, well, kidney patients are already kidney patients. They already have a kidney problem. So maybe people who have a kidney problem aren't exactly the best group of folks for which to create a baseline. So there's lots of inherent issues. But go ahead, what did you learn?
So yeah, essentially that, because where I got like the little light bulb was, I was learning when I was getting taught about what the functional range should be, and she said, well, it's going to be different for each place, or you'll have to kind of compare it to that lab's normal range. I'm like, that lab's normal range? Like, why not
also true
range? She goes, no, actually what happens is that the labs actually set the reference range, and they define that normal range based on who they're testing. So yeah, kind of like you're saying. So that reference range is merely representing the lab values of 95% of the patients that they're testing. So it can vary location to location. And I have seen that when I get people's
Geographic,
labs
yep.
back and I'm doing
Yep.
interpretations, those ranges, they're similar, but they're still different. It's not universal, it's lab to lab. And so
Correct.
this changes over time as patients are added and the sample population changes as well. And one of the things that she was seeing is that with the introduction of all these cholesterol lowering statin drugs, the normal value for cholesterol has continued to drop as a higher percentage of the population is taking these statins.
Correct.
So, and then the other thing is that because of the way insurance is starting to work,
Oh
and the
God.
insurances are contracting with the physicians and saying, you can only take these tests when it's absolutely necessary, or we're not going to cover it. We don't want to do
Correct.
preventative. So now you're getting physicians who are taking people who are already likely sick and
Right.
having problems and sending those to the labs,
Correct.
and who are now compiling this new reference range. So the lab
Correct. So you're creating a
represents,
tainted pool.
yeah, it's a pool.
Yep.
It's kind of a, yeah, it's a tainted pool of unhealthy people, or people
Yep.
already kind of at higher risk.
Yes. So I'd like to
There's
give
just tremendous pressure from these insurance companies to help minimize
Yes.
costs. So yeah, so
Which is
that's part
another-
of how they came. That's what I was taught. how they
Yes,
came
and
to be.
that also, those are also very true factors as well. The lab,
Yeah, I
the
think yours
the
was the original history
themselves-
and how it's evolved.
Yes, exactly. The original history, how it's evolved, and then, as you said, the labs themselves set their own bell curve, 95% confidence interval, whatever falls outside, statistically speaking, yada yada.
And then, yeah, you'll get into this cycle, like you want to order someone's vitamin D status just to see how they are. And the labs go, why do you want it? Well, we think they might be low. Why do you think that? Do you have a previous lab to prove it? Well, no, I want this one. You need a previous lab to prove it first. So that first one has to come out of pocket for a lot of insurance companies. And only then, if it proves that it's low, will they cover future.
Right. Or, the
prevention.
physician needs to state like, oh, the patient is experiencing signs of depression, or, whatever, seasonal affective disorder, yada, yada. The insurance is a whole other.
Yeah. But this is that example of how insurance is controlling our healthcare system.
Dictating our healthcare, which is
backwards.
Yeah. backwards. Yeah, and I completely agree. But another, I'm going to give you a good example of this. So an article came out shortly before COVID that human baseline temperature is actually not 98.6 degrees. Now, this article came out and said that, hey, we actually set, this 98.6 was established in like 18 something as normal human baseline temperature. Well, over the past however 100 years, 150 years or whatever, since this like normal statistic was established, we've become more sedentary. Our basal metabolic rate has lowered. We are not as active, and actually human baseline temperature has dropped. So this article actually was like, no, we did this huge retrospective study where we looked at hundreds of thousands of data points over hundreds of years. And no, human baseline temperature is actually closer to like 97.6. We've actually lost about 1/10 of a degree every decade for the past 100 or so years. So this article was published before COVID.
Okay.
So now we are here in COVID. Guess what we're finding? Because everybody has to have
no
their
fever.
Right. So because anytime you have to go in, and we're recording temperatures for everybody who has to go in and get checked before you go to physical therapy, before you walk in the door to your doctor's office, you have to get your temperature checked. Oh, guess what? We're confirming this giant retrospective study that said, hey, we think that this old statistic's wrong. We think it's actually this, and we have the current data to prove it. But now we have this essentially real-time study happening that's proving it. So there's a lot of opportunity potentially to do this from a lab perspective. But the problem is we have insurance industry and we have conventional medicine sort of driving this bus of, but it's normal and it's been normal, so we don't need to do anything about it until you're sick.
That brings up two interesting thoughts. So that means theoretically, someone who is showing 98.6 that we're shrugging off as healthy, theoretically could have a fever.
Correct.
Technically. And two, just because this is the new normal, does that mean that's healthy? Exactly. Is it bad that our metabolic rates and our core temperature has dropped?
Bingo! So that's a whole other topic.
Normal doesn't always mean healthy.
Exactly. And that was exactly my point. So even though you are in these quote normal ranges, does that necessarily mean that that is a healthy range? And so to get back to, for example, thyroid, because we all, I mean, like, that's such a good one.
Such a common one. Yeah.
It's such a common one. Like, oh my gosh, let's just, I cannot tell you how many friends how many women I know who have been normal thyroid, couldn't lose weight, polycystic ovarian, whatever, finally fought enough. And these are all very strong women who work in healthcare and are just as much of a bully as I am when it comes to pushing around their physicians to get what
that you have to be, but
it's shitty that you have to be. But the fact of the matter is, oh, go on a small dose of Synthroid and suddenly, oh, guess what? Everything's back to normal. Because guess what? You were subclinical. I hate that term, right? Like, oh, you fit within the normal range. Well, I guess we'll try it anyway. Just fine, we'll placate the patient. Oh, look, it worked. So if it worked, does that maybe mean that we can't trust the quote normal lab values?
Well, not only that, but Synthroid is a synthetic T4.
Right.
And a lot of times that whole assembly line, like we can get into thyroid in detail, but yeah, a lot of people, they just get the TSH.
Yeah.
And doctors will be like, well, it's normal, so you're all good. And it's like, well, no, because the TSH is what tells your body to make the T4.
Right.
So just because it's being told to make T4 doesn't mean your body is actually
making
doing
T4.
that.
Yeah.
Or it's making the T4, but your body can't convert it properly into T3. But now if we like megadose T4, then that poorly converting process can keep up a little bit, but let's still fix that problem within that assembly line.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, the number of people I get who I talk to, I'm like, you know what? Have we checked thyroid? Like maybe there's some thyroid. Oh, my TSH is fine. My doctor says it's not that. Okay, well, what about T4, T3, free T4, reverse T3, you know?
Right. Well, and that's the thing. And you start talking to doctors about anything more than like, even just you push like beyond T3, T4, or even free T3, free T4, and they're like, you know.
And how about the autoimmune markers of it, the TPO and.
Forget it. Like, and if God forbid, if everything else has come back, if you have gotten past TSH, T3, T4, and even free T3, T4, and those are, and they've all come back normal, you are like, God help you if you can get a regular physician to test TPO or anything else. Like,
I can do it. I can order that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but like, please give me their name and number. They don't exist. You need to be in the functional medicine world, because here again, that insurance driving the bus problem, becomes the point where you can't necessarily justify running the exam, running the test.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of, I wanted to segue into that too. We sort of hit on it this with the normal versus subclinical, and insurance. And again, like insurance and our healthcare system and our standards of care are so unfortunately tied into pharmaceuticals.
yes.
So that's the other thing, kind of those labs are looking at that range. First of all, it's kind of a skewy range and it changes lab to lab, location to location. But that is basically looking like,
because and geographically, right? Because
right,
you're testing
different people,
different groups of people. So your normal range for Ohio, different than your normal, like gonna have some geographic variability than your normal range for like Florida or Massachusetts. Granted, it's not going to be huge, or it shouldn't
be, but it's still different.
But it's still going to be there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not these set in stone things. Not something, it's labs are science, but they're also art, and you have to finesse kind of figuring out each person's.
They call levels. It practicing medicine for a reason.
Yes, it takes a lot of exposure and practice and
it's
research,
not a science,
and actually looking at the person and seeing what fits with what they're saying and what they're looking like. But yeah, so with that tie between health insurance and pharmaceuticals, these standards of care are kind of looking like, okay, here's our within normal range labs. And if you're within normal range, we're not doing anything. It is not till you've fallen right off the cliff that we can go ICD-10 diagnosis, prescription medicine, official label, and now we'll deal with you.
Right, exactly. And God forbid, when you fall off that cliff, you fall off that cliff with several different things and hit a couple rocks on the way down, because now you're polypharmacy and it's one medication potentially causing a side effect that affects something.
Yeah, the anti-migraine medicine that is a depressor to help reduce that neuro excitement now makes you exhausted. So now you take this thing to be an upper during the day, and that one causes diarrhea.
Yep.
So yeah, and that's kind of one of the key differences with functional nutrition versus conventional. We are not waiting till you hit that cliff and you fall off. We are looking at where before that do we want you to optimize? Where can we go, hey, you're moving in the wrong direction, and we don't want you to fall.
Yep. How do we, instead of having like Aries rack plateau, how do we build a wider hill for you with slopes if we need to? Like
prevent before you start that snowball tumble.
How do we instead of have you on this like pillar where you have an edge to fall off of, how do we create like a nice rounded mound for you to be on, where like you have room and space to not just teeter off and now be like bloop,
like gone. Yeah, that's my goal. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole lot like that we can see in those labs that go beyond these diagnoses. Like there are certain labs, if all of these labs are a little bit off, like they're not out of range, but they're a little high or a little lower compared to optimal. Well, if all of those group together, that indicates you probably have some oxidative stress, and we need to deal with that. Mm-hmm. Or this one deals with like maybe you're a little anaerobic and oxygen isn't getting through your body correctly for some reason. Maybe stress, breathing, iron, blood.
Right. Yep.
But there's all these clues.
Yes. And that, thank you for bringing that up. I love that you brought that up, because I think that's the other big problem with conventional versus functional. Conventional, you wind up with, I look at this silo, I look at this silo, I look at this silo, I look at this slice, this slice, this slice. You don't necessarily have, even your primary care provider, right? Mm-hmm. God love GPs, God love PCPs, they do what they can, but they don't necessarily, look at all the labs that need to be looked at, and B, they don't have the training and the mindset. They don't have the viewpoint of functional medicine that looks at oxidative stress. They don't have the viewpoint that looks at being anaerobic and why are you not able to appropriately carry oxygen through your blood. Are you anemic? You know, like what's happening here? What are these different factors that are causing some of these issues? So thank you. I think that that's a really good other call out, is that it is all of the other small clues that functional medicine can pull together and get from this really broader viewpoint, and more detailed information that conventional medicine just kind of ignores. They just don't necessarily look at things through that same lens. If it, you know, like if it's not a sort of binary diagnosis of, yes, you are hypothyroid or hyperthyroid, or you have an autoimmune disease and marker that we can treat, you know, it's so yes, no binary.
Yeah.
That all that middle ground gets missed.
It gets missed. And it's kind of like that puzzle piece analogy we've talked about, you know, looking here, looking here, looking here, and not kind of scattershotting everything. And that's why I don't know a single functional medical practitioner who does less than 1 hour for their first appointment with a person. You know, mine, it's like a 15-page health history, because I want to know, are you traveling a lot? Because guess what? If you fly a lot, they are spraying that airplane down with all sorts of pesticides if you go international, and that might be toxic burden. How are your fillings? Let's look at mercury. Do you have a sensitivity to bonfires? Because that can indicate certain things. You know, all this stuff that it all matters. And some of the appointments I've sat in on, maybe 2 hours for that first consultation. And I get that doctors don't have that time because again, our system is just the way it is.
The system is structured. Yep.
So they can't do that.
Nope.
And that's also, again, when it comes to insurance, like I get a lot of people are like, why can't you take insurance? Like, because they won't let me have that time with you.
Yeah.
As a dietitian, like when I was working in clinical and trying to get help out in our dialysis unit, they're like, oh, that person who has end-stage renal disease, like on dialysis, gonna die if they don't sit in this machine 3 days a week. You can talk to them for 30 minutes at a time, 3 times a year, maybe 6. I forget the exact number. So I'm like, you can't. This person's lifestyle was so bad. They are like, this is not a healthy person. This isn't like, I'll just lose 10 pounds. Like they need to do a lot to kind of bring what they can back. And that's it. In an entire year, that's all the time. I went to school for years and we spent weeks on kidney health. Yeah. I can't teach that to them and help them implement it in that little time. So that's, and they won't cover labs. So
and like, what is it? Like 4 or 6 visits a year for someone who has diabetes, and it's like a half-hour appointment, and
there's only certain things you're allowed to talk to them about.
There's only certain things that you're allowed to talk to them about. And oh, by the way, there's only certain conditions. Like when I was 100 pounds heavier than I am right now. I had a hip replacement. I'd blown out a knee. I mean, it was a shit show. And I was like, I need to be working with a dietitian. Like I have all of the information. Something is not working. I need, I know this shit. Something ain't right. And my insurance company was like, well, you don't have a qualifying condition to speak with a nutritionist. I was like, are you kidding me?
Food is medicine. We've known this since Hippocrates.
I'm like, and they're like, yeah, you don't have a qualifying condition to speak with. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And they're like, well, you're not super morbidly obese. You're not, or super hypermorbidly obese. I forget what the specific category of terminology was. 40, it was like a BMI of 40 or more, and I was only at like 37 or something like that. I mean, it was like the the level of minutia was just absolutely ridiculous. And here I was just trying to be like, I need to get healthier. And that's just, that to me is a broken system.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know there's a lot of criticism too, because a lot of medical conferences and conventions are funded by pharmaceutical companies.
Big pharma.
And I will be the first to admit, even what used to be the it was the American, I forget what it's called before, the ADA, American Dietetic Association, renamed now the American A&D.
And
I'm a part of it. I can't even remember. They've been funded by like McDonald's and Coca-Cola. And it's like, yes, I'm still a member because it allows me to group with the functional nutritionists that are a subgroup. And we
oh my God, it's a joke. It's an absolute, like, yeah.
Yeah, there are battles between conventional dietitians and functional dietitians.
Yeah. Well,
but
and
follow the money.
And for me, coming from, an academic background and working with, like I worked with the Clinical and Translational Research Center at Ohio State. I worked with their bionutrition department, like super functional. I mean, they were getting down to the nitty gritty of some of the researchy science of functional medicine, right? Because bionutrition is like, let's go to the one step below that feeds functional medicine, functional nutrition, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it was just amazing to me, some of the stories that she would share from some of these traditional. It was like, how is that, how does that resonate? It was such cognitive dissonance to me.
Yeah. So it's and the labs, unfortunately, it all ties into this. It is such a messy web of, unfortunately, the money is in pharmaceuticals and health insurance. There isn't money from like farmers to put towards produce. And even when the government steps in and does stipends, it's like corn and soy. GMO. So we won't go down that road today.
Yeah, I was going to say that's another conversation for another.
That's a different topic, but
we will need whiskey for that conversation.
Do what?
We will need whiskey for that conversation.
Whiskey. If we're doing corn talks, let's get our corn-based drinks.
Oh no, corn. I'm sorry, I have a corn sensitivity. I will need rye. Thank you.
I need a rye because I have a wheat sensitivity.
All right. Well, you get your you. Can
I love my rye. No, I've got like 3 different bottles.
Okay, that's why I said whiskey. I know, because you're a whiskey drinker. See, I'm thinking
whiskey and wine. Those are my drinks, in moderation, of course, in balance.
Grapes can't do them either right now.
But so yeah, it's a tight web between the pharmaceutical industries, the health insurance industries, and what they are dictating. Unfortunately, that's how it feels. And I know there are doctors who are frustrated by that. I was appalled in school. We had to take a medical ethics class as part of it. And a lot of it was just like, being a decent person and not sharing private stuff. Right. But we learned about the gag clause. Are you familiar with the gag clause?
Yes. Kate, please deliver.
So if I'm recalling right, because this was like almost 2 decades ago, but the gag clause was the idea that insurance would only let the doctors offer certain solutions to a patient that came in. Like if they were complaining about something, your options were A, B, or C based on what the insurance told you. That was the gag clause. The only way around it, the patient had to know that they could go, what are my other options? And only then the doctor could elaborate on other things such as lifestyle changes or. Yes. So that blew me away. That was in school. And it wasn't even like this functional nutrition. This was conventional dietetics at the University of Cincinnati, like normal, standard, good program.
Yep.
And I was like, are you kidding me?
Yep.
That.
And you know what, Kate? You know what's appalling? That still exists.
Yes.
And you know what the worst part about it is? You know who's you know who actually receives training in patient education about lifestyle change and behavior change? Nurse practitioners.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
So nurse practitioners are not allowed to practice at the top of their licenses because of the gag clause, because unless a patient knows to ask.
And even then, like I feel, so I've heard some stories, I will leave out names, but someone I says they go to their doctor, and again, they've got, the doctor kind of provides whatever options, and this person goes, okay, what would you recommend? What do you think is best? And the doctor goes, your choice. Like, you are the doctor.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yep.
want you to know what's best for me. So I don't know where that's coming from. I don't know if that's, have you heard that before? I don't know if that's like
I have.
just a
So
situation, or if there's now
yes.
some legal ramifications and insurance ramifications that are causing this.
Um yeah, so that is becoming
Like a
more of
malpractice issue.
a yes, that's becoming
Okay.
more of a malpractice issue.
Okay. So now we're roping lawyers into.
Yeah, so now we're roping lawyers in, and a lot of it's because of physicians not wanting to make a recommendation because, you know, on in and it depends upon the physician. Like there are some that still will. There are some that would say, based and it depends upon the phrasing because there are plenty. I love the Wonder Woman. There are plenty that will say, for example, my GYN will say, this is this option, these are the statistics related to successes, failures, blah, 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 blah. This is this other option, these are the successes or failures related to da, 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 da. And, in a patient of your age and with your history, these are the, if you went with this is what I would be concerned about. If you went with this is what I would be concerned about. If you went with this is what I would be concerned about. Therefore, I would say that the best solution for you is blah, but it is your choice. So there is some of that happening as well. I think it's a cop-out, I think, a lot of times, in my opinion.
My cat is eating a plant that will
Yeah.
make me throw up.
Oh, good.
Okay.
But the I think the unwillingness in a lot of cases for physicians to necessarily go into that is because in some cases, they may not know necessarily, like, really, what is the current research or background or,
Mm-hmm.
what are the statistics? What is the most effective? Like, so my experiences when a doctor's answering something with no additional feedback other than, well, it's up to you. These are my recommendations, and not giving any other information, it's a cop-out. That's my thought.
That's something I'll have to explore more because that's newer to me. But I wouldn't be surprised if malpractices are part of it because, like we said, it's the medical practice. It is a science. Things can unfortunately go wrong, even when you do your best to stay diligent to the research and understanding, and there's complications, but it wouldn't surprise me if that's kind of part of the fear in there at this point.
Yeah.
People come like, you told me to do this and it led to that.
Right.
Yeah. So I had something else I wanted to say. Now I forget. Well, that's probably a good summary of labs.
Probably.
Probably a good summary. And yeah, so they are based on general number of people they see, which unfortunately, due to insurance hand tying is now becoming the average of less and less healthy people. And pharmaceutical companies and health insurances are sort of dictating the training to and actions of doctors. And as we've talked about before many times, kind of that one thing you said from the get-go, that empowerment, that asking questions. So now we need to make sure people know, ask your doctor, what are my other options?
Yes.
Or they literally legally cannot tell you some things.
Yep.
Ask about complications, ask about side effects, ask about this, that, and the other thing. And then also remember, if it is a chronic illness, like doctors are great for that emergency sort of thing and that immediate acute, but if it is a lifelong chronic illness, seek out a functional medicine practitioner. I
absolutely
don't really know how else to say it. If you don't want to just take that pill for the rest of your life and your doctor doesn't have any other offerings for you,
find out the root cause. I mean, that's the big difference. I mean, it's a matter of, do you want a Band-Aid for a constantly leaking boo-boo, or do you want to actually fix what the problem is? It's really that simple. I mean, that's the difference between conventional and functional medicine.
Yeah.
It's patching a Band-Aid versus fixing a problem.
Yeah. And that patch is absolutely invaluable
when it's needed.
When it's needed.
I mean, it can save your life. That patch can save your life, but it's not.
Build from there.
Yeah, I was going to say it's saved your life. It does not mean that you are going to be able to thrive
or sustain that, because whatever caused that problem, unless you address it, it is going to continue to accumulate.
Yeah, and that patch will eventually fail.
Most likely, yeah. Yeah, and I know that's something kind of you and I have talked about with like food sensitivity testing, which I don't want to dive into too much now, but yeah, it's even that, like for a long time, people were like, oh, well, if you have IBS, what's the cause? Food sensitivities. And now I'm going even deeper, like what's the cause of the food sensitivities? GI health,
right.
And lifestyle. So even that, getting down into that deep initial, what is that first domino that fell over, that over 6 months to 6 years or more led to
where we're at.
Autoimmune, diabetes, IBS, arthritis, whatever. So
all of it.
Any other closing thoughts?
I'm gonna depart with a story.
Ooh.
So I was working at the world's largest research institution that's based here in Columbus. I won't name names, but it's the world's largest research institution and it's based here in Columbus. And we were assigned a project to determine if we could predict acute kidney injury.
Okay.
And we were given a set of 300,000 patients who had had acute kidney injury. And could we figure out the pathways that were causing acute kidney injury? And now mind you, me at the time, low man on the totem pole, no PhD, working with tons of people who have PhDs, math statisticians, people who have been working at this big research institution for longer than I've been on the face of the planet and are more than willing to let me know that. And I was like, there is a difference, biologically speaking, between men and women. Period. There's a difference between men and women. And I said, let's use this example. You give a 150-pound male and a 150-pound female 3 shots each. There's going to be a difference in blood alcohol content because women have less of the enzyme that produces
three drink shots.
Three shots, 3 drink shots each. Women are going to have a higher blood alcohol content because they have less of the enzyme that metabolizes alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Fact. Science, right?
Yes.
So you could take 10 men and women, 100 men and women. There's going to be, this is a clear scientifically proven difference. Now, we can do the same experiment and do it between men and women that are Caucasian and men and women that are Asian, because Asians have less of the enzyme that metabolizes alcohol, which, by the way, if you're ever around Asians that are drinking, is part of the reasons why they flush so easily. So now we've said, okay, we know that there's a biological difference in how not only men and women process alcohol, but different racial groups and different genetic groups process alcohol, right? So this is basic biology.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, so finally, it was like I've been pounding on this for freaking months. Everybody's going away. It takes like 5 days to run this data set. And I said, Dave, do me a favor, while we're on break, run the data. I don't care. Just split it by men and women. I don't care about race. Just split it by men and women. And let's see what the top 20 indicators are for acute kidney injury. Just splitting by men and women. Let's see what the top 20 indicators are. Because they were like, well, we don't understand why we're getting these like muddy bands, blah, blah, blah. The difference is there was absolutely there were 3 crossover items in the top 20, and they were like way at the bottom. And they were things that you'd be like, well, duh, of course. That's going to affect everybody. So here's the other take home from labs. We're blending men and women together.
True. Very true.
Have we ever thought about the differences?
Some do separate out, but not
Some
all.
do.
Yeah, but not all.
Not all. And I would say in my experience, it's more of the exception than the rule.
True.
So that's another story from my perspective that highlights just how irreverent labs can be when not utilized properly.
When not individualized.
When not
Personalized.
When not personalized.
Very true.
It's very important. So there you go. That's another.
That's your story. Hopefully drive that home.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for chatting again today, as always.
Always a pleasure. Can't wait to do it again next week.
What topic next week? Let's see if people ask anything. We'll have to think.
We'll have to see. We'll have to see what comes
Whiskey
up.
and GMO. Glyphosate.
We'll think. We'll cogitate.
We'll come up with something. And
if not, people, if you have demands, tell us.
Let us know. We like to talk. Clearly. But it's important. It is. Yeah. And so I'm glad we're doing this, because it does frustrate me sometimes, the lack of awareness and therefore the barriers that get run into, because people don't understand where these numbers are coming from, where these rules are coming from, where these restrictions are coming from. They don't even realize there are restrictions and rules, and that can be limiting their ability to feel their best.
Right. And I was going to say, and the downstream impacts and limitations that then puts, the constraints that puts on them. I mean, it's really, yeah. So functional medicine.
Give it a try.
Give it a shot.
So stay empowered, stay strong, find out how to thrive.
Strive to thrive.
Strive to thrive.
All right.
And we'll see you guys next week.
Bagging.